This is Brad Wiles, and I am interviewing Betsy Toll as part of the Bayview Historical Society's 40th Anniversary Oral History Project. It is currently about 11:50 a.m. at on a Monday, September 23rd, 2019. We are conducting the interview at the Beulah Brinton House. Kathy Mulvey is also here for the interview, and Betsy has agreed to participate and contribute today's recording to the Bayview Historical Society's archival collection so that it may be preserved and available for future use as indicated on the deed of gift form reviewed and signed by Betsy. Betsy, please be assured that we understand that your participation is fully voluntary and that we can take a break, postpone, or terminate the interview at any time at your request.
Okay.
We have a list of questions to help get the discussion started, but you are welcome to decline answering any of these that you don't want to answer, and to answer others as you see fit. We have some topics that we want to cover, but mostly we want to hear what you have to say about your experiences in Bayview. We have set aside 1 hour for this interview, with the understanding that it may run slightly shorter or longer.
Okay.
We thank you for your time and willingness to share your stories with us today. And with that, we'll get started. So if you could please state your full name, where you were born, and where you currently live.
My name's Elizabeth Toll. I go by the name Betsy. I live at 3071 South Superior Street in Milwaukee, Bayview.
Cool. And were you born in Bayview?
Yes, I was born in Bayview. I'm third generation living in Bayview.
Cool. And have you been in the same place that you are now for a while? Is it a family property?
I'm third generation in my home.
In your home, okay.
Mhm.
Wow. Excellent. So you went to school here in Bayview.
Yes,
Which schools did you go to?
I went to Immaculate Conception, or IC as we all call it, and then I went to St. Mary's Academy for high school, and then I went away for college to UW-Madison.
Okay. And then you came back here after college?
I spent 7 or 9 years living away, and then I came back.
Okay. So what did you do after college? What was your...
I'm a teacher.
Teacher, okay. What do you teach?
Well, let's see, I started out teaching preschool. I taught Head Start. I taught elementary school. Then when I moved back here, I got a job in Pewaukee teaching. I was a reading specialist, so I taught reading. And then I ended up teaching math, and I worked in Pewaukee for 28 years and lived in Bayview
The whole time?
Yes.
Oh wow, that's quite a haul to go out there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It was, anyway.
Yeah.
It's worse now.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Okay. So teaching for a long time. Can you talk about some of the ties that you have to the neighborhood? You mentioned third generation. How did
Yes.
your family come to live here in Bayview?
Okay, my grandfather came to the U.S. through New York in 1908. He was 29 years old, and he married my grandmother I assume that she's from Stamford, Connecticut. Her name was Dennison. His name was Verlinden, Edmund Verlinden. And he came to Milwaukee to work for the Weingart Organ Company as designing church statuary and organs, pipe organs. He eventually had his own pipe organ factory called Verlinden Organ Factory. So he and my grandmother came. My mother was born in Bayview on the corner of KK and Linebarger Terrace, and on the, it would be in the it'd be the southeast corner in that building. And she used to take me over there when I was a little girl, and she'd show me the wrong house and the wrong room and say, "This is the house I was born in, and that's the room I was born in." But when I started researching my family history, I realized she meant the building next door, but she was little and didn't know. And then her sister, then they moved across the street to the big house on the corner on the north. There's a big house there. I don't know whose house it is. It's got to be something historical.
Is that White House?
Yes.
That's a Sears house, you know. A Sears
I didn't know
Roebuck
that.
house. You could order that from the catalog.
Was it really? Okay. And my grandfather rented that home and my mother used to tell me, and I'm not sure if all her stories are true or not, but so I'm just going to say, she told me that they went to be like an ambassador to China or something in China for 2 years, so my grandparents lived there.
Mhm.
In the meantime, our house was built in 1911 by a fellow named Hofer, and it has many different, Hofel has many different spellings. And I kind of been researching my house history, so I'm finding some of the stuff out. And in our actually the title of our house goes back. It is exactly the same as the Beulah Britton house because Kathy and I looked at it once, but it separates when the Lakeside extension was split up. And so Hopeful built the house, and in 1919, my grandparents moved in, and in that year in the city directory, both my grandparents and the Hopefuls lived in that house. And in 1920, in the city directories, they started labeling. They added the woman's name to resident of the home. They used to just say wife, then they put in parentheses when women got the right to vote. I thought that was fascinating. And then they moved in there in 1919, and my grandparents had their third child, my other aunt, in that home. And then they lived there, and during the war, in 1922, my grandpa wanted to put an addition on the home. It was considered a 1.5-story house, so he put an addition on the home, and he got it. I was looking at the microfiche, and he got a building permit to do a sunroom and a bath, a water closet they called it, and an entrance, a stairway. So, and then during beefing on up, that's basically all that was left about the house. And during the World War II, my aunt and her 5 children and my parents and the 3. I wasn't born yet. The 2 children lived in the house with my grandparents. Then when my grandma died, my grandfather sold the house to my parents with the stipulation he could live there till he died, which he did. And then I was born in 1951 and lived there until I went off to college. Mm-hmm. And now I'm back. Since the early 80s, I've lived back in the house. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I'm trying to place where Lineberger Terrace. That's.
You know where Kneppers is?
Oh yeah, sure.
With the gas station and
Yeah.
Kneisler's. Yeah, my mom used to sit on the steps of her house and watch the men go from the steel mill with their buckets for their beer, and they go to Kneisler's, get their buckets of beer, and then she'd watch it every day.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
That was
Sure.
excitement in those days, I guess.
Yeah. So can you talk about any specific memories of growing up here? Anything about like any of the characteristics or the neighborhood, like sections of the neighborhood or activities, things about the lake, things like that?
Well, I've always loved water, and I know where I got that from. Being born here, you have to be near water. Mm-hmm. We didn't live on the lake. We lived across the street from Lake Michigan, but we would all sit on the front stairs waiting for my father to come home from work. Then as soon as we saw his station wagon coming down the street, we knew we would get to go. He'd say, "Okay, we're going to the beach." We'd go across the street, and there were stairs going down. There was a fence at the bottom, so people couldn't get through. But there were keys. People had them in their garages. So we'd take Mrs. Schubert's key, and we'd go down to the beach, and we'd play on the beach, which is now the walkway down there. There's no beach left anymore, as we all know. And we bring our dogs down there, and we would play at the beach all the time. I was not allowed to cross Superior Street when I was growing up until I passed intermediate swimming. And there were lots of rules, and I was sworn to never swim out to the break wall, although I found out from my mother that she and her sisters did it all the time. Actually, my mother didn't tell me. My aunt told me, "Oh my gosh," she said, "we swam out there all the time." So, and they would stand on, some years they could stand on Texas Rock, because it was so shallow. And there used to be, she told me a story about, there used to be a big, sled run that went parallel to the shoreline from South Shore Park, kind of where the intake is now, and it went down the hill there until some kid, she said there were a lot of crashes on those toboggans, and some kid broke their arm, and they called the ambulance to come, and when the ambulance was going down there, they hit a toboggan of sledders, and then no one was allowed to sled there anymore. But anyway, so you want to know about my remembrances. Mm-hmm. I knew everybody across the street on the other side of the street for the whole block, and many of them had sailboats at South Shore Yacht Club. And it was very friendly. Everyone was very friendly to each other. And there were no kids in my neighborhood my age until 2 doors down, the Ottaviani family moved in, and their daughter was in 3rd grade and I was in 2nd grade. And we had a ton of fun. She had a pet skunk. We got in a lot of trouble with, well, one time is this the kind of stuff it's okay to tell?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we put the pet skunk in her doll carriage, and we're walking around. Some man was going to the bus stop on the corner of the triangle there, and he saw us with a skunk, and he thought we had picked up a wild skunk. It was a descented skunk, which I guess now would be horrible to do to a skunk. So he chased us and chased the skunk, and the skunk got scared, and it ran down to the beginning of Bayview Park and across the Pier Street. We had to stop the traffic, and it got hidden in the bushes, and then we tried to explain to him that this was a pet skunk. And another time we got the skunk back. And another time we took the skunk, my sister was having a sleepover party up in our shared bedroom, and we snuck in with the skunk. We put it in somebody's bed, and I got in a lot of trouble for that. So. There used to be a submarine park down here. My father started the first Sea Scouts in Milwaukee.
What? A submarine park?
There used to be a submarine parked down here.
Parked.
It was the Tautog, and the number was 199, Tautog. It was pretty good. It had a lot of tonnage done in World War II, because I was a submarine buff. Because when my father, they had the Sea Scout meetings on the submarine, and to get rid of me, my mother would send me to go with my dad, and I'd walk around in all the tours and listen, and I learned a lot about submarines.
Can you talk about the Sea Scouts a little bit more?
Yes, my father started the first group of Sea Scouts in Milwaukee. So my brother had a group of scouts. So he had Sea Scouts had mostly to do with the water, but he had gone through Boy Scouts, and my dad wanted him to get interested in sailing and Scouts. So he started the first Sea Scout group. And there's a Russell Center down there now. Many people think it's called the Russell Center because it's at the end of Russell. It's called that after my father's best friend, Bill Russell, who carried on after my dad. He's the probably second oldest old guy who hung out there. And they had many Eagle Scouts that went through there. And the problem with the Sea Scouts is after the kids would get out of being a scout, when they turned 18, they wanted to be a leader so they could continue sailing and working with the Scouts. But in the 80s, well, I think now the city has kicked them out. But in the 80s, there was a big deal that they were trying to get rid of the Sea Scouts down there, but we had a huge petition, and all these scouts came forward and signed the petition, so they kept them down there. But now they've lost the lease, and I don't know what's going on. So
The Russell Center, where's that at?
it's right on the corner where Russell. If when you go towards Lake Michigan on Russell Avenue, if you were going to go straight into the lake, that's right down there. And there's a metal building. One of the scouts donated that building. He came to our house. He was in the Merchant Marine, and I think I was in high school, and he came to our house and rang the doorbell on Christmas Eve and said, "Give your father this check." I said, "What's it for?" He said, "Build the scouts a building." So he saved up enough money to build them a building down there. So, yeah. And my dad would go there. The last time I went the submarine was long gone. But the Cobia was the second submarine, and that one is up in Manitowoc right now. I wanted to be the first woman submarine, but someone beat me to it when I was in college. And I used to love to swing through the little holes, the portholes between the room. They weren't portholes exactly, but they're oval doors, and you could put your hands up, and I could swing through them. And when I went through the Cobia in Manitowoc, I realized I would have been too claustrophobic to be a submariner. But the last time I went sailing with my dad, he couldn't walk anymore, and we left his wheelchair on the edge of the water, and they had a big crane, and I put him down in a bosun's chair into a lightning, and we went out sailing, and one of his friends, probably Bill Russell, came down there and saw his chair there, and he wasn't there, and he about had a hissy fit. But we came back. That was before cell phones, so you couldn't call anybody. So, and that's the last time I remember sailing with my dad. And
So is that something that you've done throughout the years, sailing and?
I did a lot of canoeing and kayaking. You couldn't go, girls couldn't go with the Boy Scouts, so I never could go on the boats with the boys unless they had room, and they never had room. So I go down there and hang out and see if there's room for me or not. But there usually wasn't room.
You go down where?
To the Sea Scout
Oh.
base, they called it, and wait to see if I could get on the boats.
Don't you race sometimes?
Oh, when I moved back in the 80s, my neighbor said they were looking for crew on a boat, and I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. So I ended up racing on Wednesday night social series at the yacht club for several years, and when one of the guys was retiring and moving to Door County, I bought his share of the boat, and then I was partners in that boat, 20-foot boat for probably, I think, 10 years.
So did you actually, like, I don't know what the right word is, like, actually, like, man the boat, like, during the race?
Well, the skippers, the
out
two
the
guys
boat?
that shared the skippering, and I worked the front end for a long time, which is putting up the main and the jib, and changing to the big sail. Oh my God, I can't remember. I worked the front end. That was to me the biggest prestige thing I could ever have done, was to work the front end of that boat. And then my doctor told me, no, the best thing to work is the back end of the boat. Steering the boat is the best job on the boat. So yeah.
Why is that? Why?
Because then you're in charge, I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I liked working with the rigging. And I've
Uh-huh.
always liked that. I've liked tying knots. I found a book upstairs here that had a knot to it. I said, I had this book when I was a kid. So, yeah.
Interesting. So did you have other family members that were involved? Did you have any siblings or people in your immediate family, any children, or how has, I guess, the interest in sailing and kind of these water sports, has that been part of your family?
My father sailed probably until the summer when he passed away, when he was in his, I think he was, I don't know if he was 74. I don't know if he died in 74 or if he was 74. I can't remember. But he always sailed. And my brother was a Sea Scout leader for a couple of years after my dad became the chairman of the committee for the Sea Scout unit. And I think it's now the only Sea Scout unit in the state. And let's see, so I sailed mostly because of my dad. And I've always loved water. I was a lifeguard and a water safety instructor at Tuckaway Country Club for when I was in high school and college. And I did canoeing, and there was no kayaks. We did a lot of canoeing and canoe racing through Girl Scouts. I'm a big Girl Scout. My mother was president of the Girl Scouts for Milwaukee County for however long they are that. And we ate a lot of Girl Scout goop whenever my mom was away. She'd leave stuff, and my dad said, oh, we got Girl Scout goop left to eat for supper. Then he'd make supper. So, do you want to know anything about the old neighbors who lived in my neighborhood or anything?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I can name everyone who lived in the houses all the way down the street, and some of them still are there. And we had two doctors. Dr. Adam Cavage lived across the street from us, and Dr. Landsberg lived next door to us. And when I was turned 16, he called up and asked if I would like a job working on Wednesdays and Saturdays with him. And I worked in his office in Cudahy and taking names of people, and they were a fabulous family. And his daughter, who is 9 years older than I am, comes every summer to visit. And she stares out our windows at her house from our guest bedroom. And many of the people from grade school when I still get together with my girlfriends from kindergarten. And in high school, this is kind of an interesting story. My freshman year, I was in, you don't know everyone, you don't know anyone in your homeroom. I think they try and separate you out. And I was sitting there, and this girl behind me kept telling me stories of things her mother would say. And I'd say, my mother says that. And I came home after several times of this, and my mother said, ask her what her name is, her mother's name. Well, my mother and her mother grew up across the street from each other.
Wow.
Yeah. And as far as St. Mary's Academy goes, my mother and her sisters went to grade school at St. Mary's. and they were the first day students. And St. Mary's had a great big reunion down at Summerfest one year. And my sister, we all went to St. Mary's. You had to go to St. Mary's. You had no choice. All my mother's sisters went to St. Mary's. Everybody went to St. Mary's, so we went to St. Mary's. Well, we took my mother downtown. It was to the Summerfest grounds in the 80s. And she could not find anyone in her class because they didn't list them. And she graduated in 1929 from St. Mary's, and she graduated in 33 from Marquette. So we told her to get her to go because she didn't want to go. She says, there's not going to be anyone there who's as old as I am. We told her the oldest member, this is naughty, we were really bad. We told her the oldest member there was going to win a car. And then they did the oldest member there was a nun. And my mother said, those nuns, you know they'd rig it so they could get a new car. But that was just a joke. But anyway, so yeah, so I have much connection to this area and to the land. And
How are you feeling about the new buildings at St. Mary's?
well, it bothered me because I had just come back from Europe, and there, they preserve all their buildings. And this summer they were ripping it down. I had just come back from a trip, and they, modernized from the inside of all these buildings in Europe and preserve history. And so that bothered me. But on the other hand, they have to move on, as we all have to move on, and so that was that. My mother told me a funny story about when she was a freshman in college. Her parents went. My grandfather had built an organ and was being shipped to Europe somewhere, and so he and my grandmother left for a month. And she had, as a freshman in college, she had to go live at St. Mary's, and with her two sisters. And she'd show me in the back where on the porch where she'd crawl out and come down the the stairwell, the fire, what is that called? Fire
escape?
the stairs.
Oh, sure.
So, and she came down the fire stairs and to meet her boyfriend, and she'd show me that, and I believe that's probably true.
Can you talk a bit more about your time at St. Mary's Academy? What it was like going to school there?
Mm-hmm. All my friends were. I had 3 friends from my grade school who I walked to school with every single day, and They lived where the blue condos are right now. One of them lived, and the other one lived on Superior. And so we'd walk to school together every day. There were other girls there from my high school class, but then my Girl Scout troop disbanded, which was mortifying for me. So I went to a new Girl Scout troop, and most of those kids went to Sacred Heart and then to Bayview. And so a lot of my friends were all revolved around that group of girlfriends from IC who went to St. Mary's, and then my group of girlfriends from Bayview, and mostly revolved around Girl Scouts. But I didn't want to go to St. Mary's, but it was only 5 minutes from my house, and I knew I had to go because my mother said I had to go. And it was actually, my mother spent a lot of time reteaching me religion of what we were told in grade school. So it was a breath of fresh air to go to St. Mary's because they were much more open and liberal in their thinking. Mm-hmm. And as I got older, I realized that the kids who came to St. Mary's, who were in my class, thought St. Mary's was the opposite of where they had gone to school. So for me, it was liberating going there.
Huh.
And I didn't do much at St. Mary's. I mostly did everything with Bayview and Girl Scouts with my friends from Bayview. Mm-hmm. My girlfriend's father owned a 1929 Ford, and I could drive stick, and so I got to drive that car in the Bayview homecoming, and I was very excited about getting to do that. Except we wore out the horn, and I was really worried about having to tell her dad we wore out the horn. He goes, "Oh, that's okay, nothing to it." And I was so relieved because I was really worried. So
what kind of things does like a young woman do in Bayview when you were growing up?
Oh,
What
well,
what-
starting in
what we forgot?
seventh. Well, we never had to lock our doors around here at all. I think we didn't lock the doors till I think that I think I came to visit my parents in the late 70s, early 80s, and my parents turned the house into a duplex, and they never locked the door. And the guy worked as a bartender. I think he worked as a bartender at Random. I'm not sure. After he had finished his regular job, and so he'd come home like at 2:00 in the morning, and just walk in and say, "Marcy, John, I'm home." And he'd go upstairs, and I was sitting there one night, and my parents were sleeping in their chairs, and I'm like, my father was 40 something when I was born, and my mother was 39, so I'm like the youngest. So I'm sitting there, and they're both sound asleep in their chairs, and the guy, someone came in the door, and I realized it was not the guy who lived upstairs when I was watching Late Show. So I yelled, "John, get up!" And my dad got up, and he chased the guy. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know he could walk that fast. And so then we started locking our doors. And so we girls, we would go ice skating at South Shore Park. And the ice skating rink, I think, used to be where the volleyball court is now. But when we were ice skating, it was in front of the pavilion. So it was right on the lake, and that was very cold. And some of more of the older kids and the tougher boys would go there, or more macho kids would go there to go ice skating. But every night you got your homework done as soon as you came home from school, so you could go ice skating. So we preferred to go to Humboldt Park because it was bigger, and there were a lot more younger kids there. So I would walk to my girlfriend's house, and then we'd pick up 2 or 3 gals, and we'd walk to Humboldt Park. Sometimes I'd take the bus home. Sometimes I just walked to a friend's house. My dad would pick us up. But we ice skated all the time. I think that, we did that in the winter, and in the summer you went to the parks, and they had games and stuff you could play and do. And we rode our bikes all over the place, and never worried about a thing.
Yeah. It's not really something, well, I mean, I think it's something I grew up in a real small town, and it's kind of the same way. It's interesting how this neighborhood in this kind of big metro area, it's kind of a similar vibe, I think.
Yeah.
I hear people talk about it.
Well, Bayview was like a little town on the edge of the city, basically. And until the whole bridge, you couldn't really get it. You had to go down the city streets to get to downtown. But it was really isolated,
Sure.
which was okay. And let's see, I'm just trying to think. You want to know anything about the Seminary Woods, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Or I could talk about
I
the.
just found out
794,
that
the
people
lake
can
property.
actually go back there. I didn't realize that the Seminary Woods were.
When I was a little girl, I was afraid to go back there. My mother told me not to go back there because the big boys hung out there. And when my boat partner, who also grew up in Bayview, was a guidance counselor at Fritchie, said, "I used to play in those woods all the time." I said, "Well, you were the kind of boy guy we were supposed to not hang or go near because you were a naughty boy." And he told me he had a red bike. I said, "I don't know what color bike mine was," but. When I got older, when I moved back here in the, I moved back, I think in the 80s, I got very involved in the Seminary Woods and the Seminary Woods organization, and trying to save the Seminary Woods and trying to get it to be donated to conservancy, land conservancy, or to have protection put on it, and that didn't work out. But I love the Seminary Woods. I love the wildflowers in the Seminary Woods. There's a woman named Sandy Sanderick, and she used to be in charge of the Seminary Woods group, and she had a calendar, I think it's called the Phenology, of all the plants that came up in the Seminary Woods and what date they came up, so you could kind of figure out when they were coming up. And I spend a lot of time. I still walk my dog in Seminary Woods. I'm very respectful of never letting them off the leash in the woods because they don't want you to. We've picked a lot of garlic mustard out of the Seminary Woods, and then when the last effort fell through, I thought, I can't do this anymore. It took too much energy.
Let's see that.
Yes, that's when the Spritz wanted to
Yes,
build.
Yes, and then the priest forgot that they had entered into this. You should,
Yes,
yes,
strange,
Yeah.
strange. That's when we got to know each other.
Yes.
Working on the seminary woods.
yes, yeah. When I was here in the early 80s, when I moved back, they were trying to get the bridge to nowhere to go somewhere.
With the reach to nowhere.
The home bridge was a bridge to nowhere, and they wanted it to
Oh.
go somewhere. And the original plan was to make that into an expressway, and that would have just cut off our neighborhood from everything. And so my mother and I worked together with a committee, and we would have committee meetings and go to all the meetings at South Shore Park. And the governor and the state came up with 11 alternative plans, and they had the community people vote on them. And they finally, some of the plans were quite outlandish, like make it all one way going into downtown, and then in the evening one way going out of downtown was one of the plans. Another one was to build a bit, like go along the breakwater and build a wall out there. Imagine the pollution we'd have down here
Yeah.
then if that had happened. And then a plan that everyone agreed on, finally voted on, was the one they got. But the speed limit was never to go above, it was a parkway, it was never to go above 40. And then within the last 4 years, I think they changed it to 50, which there's not that many people around who remember that was the agreement. It couldn't go above 40. And
There was 749 or 794 coming down.
yeah, and then I read when they were doing the construction on 94 this last summer, there was an article in the ideas section of the paper which said, just let everyone go 60. Well, my friend lives 2 blocks off of the parkway. When they change it to 40 to 50, you can now hear the parkway at her home. And I thought, oh my God, just to be so self-centered, it's all about me going home. That was an irritation. I almost wrote a letter then, but I didn't, so.
Yeah, I take that regularly. Nobody goes 40 or 50.
Oh my God, they go so fast. Yes.
Can you say something about, I was so horrified when you told me that you used to play on the mountains of coal from the We Energies plant.
Yeah, before the Cousins Center was built, there used to be a train that took the workers down to the coal plant. And when I was, and there were
Where was the coal
mountains
plant located?
where, you know where the FBI building is now?
Sure.
Just to the south of that and on the lakeside, there was a coal plant. But the
Like they're building all the
condos, there was a
as
big
fast as they
trestle
can.
that went across, and that there was a train that brought the workers to and from the coal plant, from the tracks that went parallel to, which I think now are parallel to the parkway. And my father, there were huge mountains and mounds of sludge and coal ash and stuff. And my dad and I would always go there to fly kites. We'd get a good hill to hide behind so you wouldn't get the wind off the lake, and we'd send our kite up. And we flew a lot of kites down there. And then when I was older and found out there used to be arsenic poured there and all the things they had poured there before the Cousins Center built the Cousins Center, that's what we did. And another thing that happened, which was environmentally wild, when they they ripped down the power plant, but they left the 3 stacks. And when they left the 3 stacks that were there, when they ripped those down, the people who were taking it down did not wear any special suits or anything. And there was I started reading an article, it was in the Post magazine, this is before the Bayview Compass, in the Post magazine, and that article ended up getting copyrighted because it was such a good article, and it was a series, and it was about how a lady was washing her husband's clothes when he came home from working on the construction project, or the deconstruction project there. And it had all this white powder on it. She didn't know what it was, and she wanted to know if the paper could investigate to find out what it was. Well, it was asbestos. And they were ripping, whoever the power company hired, were ripping it down without, this gal who wrote this article, who I have no idea who she is, but it ended up, then they shut it all down. And later on, when the men came back, they're all wearing white suits, and they look like they're from outer space. And but that was very interesting. So, and I understand from what I learned is that power plants and stacks from the old coal plants were filled with asbestos. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Mhm.
So you mentioned going away for a while and coming
Mhm.
back. You were away for, did you say 9 years? Or-
Yeah, I spent 5 years in the UP in Houghton Hancock, which I loved. My mother, I could tell you a story about my mother. I started cross-country skiing there, and I decided I wanted to cross-country ski, and my mother told me she used to cross-country ski. And in the snowstorm of 47, she and my father got their skis on, and they skied to Cudahy, where they knew there was bread to ski, and they skied back with a toboggan, and they brought all bread and milk on the toboggan for the neighborhood. And so she was pretty elderly. She was walking with a cane. We went out in Bayview Park, and she taught me how to ski. She by speaking and telling us, slide, glide, push, push, opposite hands. And so she taught me how to cross-country ski, and that was pretty cute. But I really got into it when I lived in Houghton, and I also, after that, I moved to Pennsylvania, and I got into it in Pennsylvania. So I lived in Pennsylvania for 4 years after living in the UP.
Mm-hmm. And you were teaching both places?
Yeah. My first husband taught at Penn State there in the wildlife department, which is what is responsible for getting me into being so. I've always been interested in the environment.
Sure.
So Aldo Leopold's daughter was one of the TAs at the environmental class I took when I was at Madison.
Oh, wow.
Did not realize how cool that was till I read Sand County Almanac.
Absolutely.
You know.
So what did you notice being away that time and coming back? I mean, obviously you had family ties here, and you know this sort of long history with previous generations. But did you what had changed? I guess was there anything you noticed?
Well, there's a lot more traffic going down Superior. A lot of the neighbors stay really long, and when people move, it's very upsetting to the neighborhood. We just had neighbors down the block from us just sold their house, and everyone's pretty devastated that they're moving. It's still, I think, a very sturdy neighborhood. You don't just come here, live for a couple years, and move on. So I think it's important that the schools stay good here, and I think we have some good schools. And the houses are similar. I am not happy with the. Okay, let me back up. I think we need some rules and laws to protect the homes and the styles of homes here, so that we keep enough green space around each house and the footprints are the same, and you cannot go up many stories, because when they built the tower, the Bayview Terrace Tower, that was an abomination for everyone who lived here. And they made some kind of law that there would never be another high-rise in Bayview, because at that point people were concerned it was going to end up looking like Farwell and Prospect and the East Side. And I think that fear has come back. And every time someone sells a house, there are people who live next to it are worried about what's going to happen to the home that's there. So I hope that our next alderman who comes up, we can work with that person to get some laws. Because my roofer, who's from Pewaukee, where I taught, told me that he said, you can't do half the stuff in Waukesha. They've got so many rules, it's incredible. So I think we need more rules to help protect our area. That's not really answering your question. I'm off on a tangent, sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, and just generally, I mean, how have things changed besides that? A lot of people have talked about that, just the kind of the streetscapes and trying to maintain this, kind of aesthetic, of the neighborhood and keep its history and all that kind of thing. But there's this sort of onward march of what some consider progress, that you have to balance with it. And so I guess you would mention something about projects. Have you done a lot of environmental advocacy here in the area or in the neighborhood specifically?
Seminary Woods. I really stuck with Seminary Woods. And There's lots of concern about the lake, about the land across from your house on South Shore Drive. I hope that remains. And yeah, there are people here, okay, or descendants of people here who I remember their parents and grandparents. And let's see, there's a woman who lives across the street from me who's very private, and she's 96 years old. I remember when she moved in, and she came from the east side, and she wasn't sure she was going to like it here, so they rented their house for a year, and she's been here ever since. So, and she was in her 40s when she moved here. So, yeah, she's a lovely lady. And there was a woman who lived on the end of our block at the beginning of South Shore, out Bayview Park, and her name's Mrs. Schutte, and she was a very lovely lady. I talked to her all the time, and her husband, she donated that bench near the iron well, I think, and in honor of her husband when he passed away. And she was there, and all of a sudden she was gone, and it was upsetting. And when my mother went to assisted living out in Brookfield, Mrs. Schutte lived there, and they had a grand old time. And I was so reassured that Mrs. Schutte was still around, because they just disappear sometimes.
Sure.
I love elderly people. I'm getting to be that way too. But I don't know, I think, I can tell you during World War II, my father was not in the service, but he was the black captain on our block for the civil defense or something. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I remember at IC, we had to have those, this is kind of a cute story. We had to have those things where they were for in case the Russians invaded. We had to sit underneath the desks. And then there was this one, they were going to have this one day where they're going to let all the kids out of school. And if you could get home in 15 minutes, you did not have to spend the war with the nuns. If you could not get home in 15 minutes, you were going to have to spend the war at school with the nuns. And my friend Deborah Taviani, who lived down the block, and I practiced taking our bikes to and from school. And we'd do the route, and we'd time ourselves every day to see the best way to get home. And we were pretty much on the outskirts for IC, I think, being that we were like a block from the city limits of St. Francis. And we finally figured out if we carried our bikes over these railroad tracks, I can't even tell you where it was now, but we went over the tracks and we zipped on home. We made it. So on the day of the test, we didn't lock our bikes. We just put the chain around our bikes. We left the chain in the lock at school. We zipped out of there, and we both made it home. And I don't know how they timed you or anything, but I just knew I had to be home. I can remember asking my mother, how are we ever going to find Dad? And she said, well, one of the neighbors was going to drive us to the city limits, and we're going to meet him at the first wayside on 4145. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I grew up thinking that was how it was going to happen. And you're going to learn well. That was never going to happen that way. Yeah. You never see him again. So that was one of the fears, is that. And last year I had a man come to clean my furnace, and it turned out he went to IC, and he was asking me about, I used to call the nuns at IC the Sisters of Non-Mercy. And he called them the Sisters of Unmercy. And he asked me, he said, I can't remember the meanest nun there, and I could come up with her name in a heartbeat. I said, oh, Sister Mary, blah, blah, blah. And I think he probably missed his next call to clean the furnace, because we went on and on about going to IC, so I didn't particularly enjoy going to school there. My mother was a public school teacher and believed in public education. But I think when we were kids, the enrollment was low at IC, and the priest came and told her we had to go there. So, and when I came home from grade school and told, I was flunking religion in first grade, those catechism questions. I'm not a good memorizer. And my father, who was Lutheran, My mother's Catholic, my father's Lutheran. There's never any issues. My father, I said, if the Presbyterians had a good basketball team, I was Presbyterians. If the Lutherans had a good baseball team, I was Lutheran. So he was pretty open-minded. He had to practice my religion questions with me, which I'm sure he was mad about because he's asking me, who made you? I said, God made you. Who is God? I said, God was a creamed bean. That's what I thought in first grade. And I remember him, he had his newspaper on his lap and it flew up, all the sections flew up in the air like a fan was blowing him. He was in the kitchen and my mother said, Elizabeth, Mary. And I went into the kitchen. She said, who made you? God made you. Who is God? And I told her and she's like, oh my God. And my father was angry because here they are paying for this Catholic religion and his daughter thought that God was a bean. He said to me, how did you feel when we ate beans for dinner? I said, I thought that was a different kind of a bean. I don't know. So anyway, they spent that was one of the stories of my religious upbringing.
Frank's sister was leading the rosary for her family one time.
Oh, yeah.
And she says, and God provide for the poor fools in purgatory. That's what she
Poor
thought
souls.
it said, the poor fools,
Fools.
in purgatory.
I came home one time after All Souls Day or whatever, they told us if you went into, at recess, if you went into the church and you said 6 Hail Marys, 6 Our Fathers, 6 Glory Bees, and you had to walk out of the church, you could get one of your relatives out of purgatory. So I assumed everyone in my family was in purgatory because we had no saints. So I went in and out, and I came home. I said, Ma, you don't have to worry about it. I sent everyone back to my great-grandparents. I said those Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and Glory Bees so fast I got them all out of purgatory. And she was like, oh my God. So we had sat down and had a conversation about that too. So, you know.
I like the Glory Bees. They were shorter and easier.
Oh, yeah. Yes, you know.
So, are there anything else that you want to talk about as far as how things have changed or other specific recollections of the neighborhood? Or
I think I haven't talked about it.
I think it's interesting from the perspective of you being a commuter going from here to
Pewaukee.
Milwaukee for so long.
I'll tell you. Okay, I can tell you something about that. I would tell the kids stories about my neighbors and how I was over at my neighbors and my neighbor and I did this or whatever and blah, blah. And I knew all the neighbors and all the old people in my neighborhood and I would tell them stories and they'd say, my God, I've lived here 5 years. I don't know the people who live next door to me. So I always thought that was one of the benefits of living here is that you know your neighbors. And I think people here make an effort. The people who have lived here a while make an effort to get to know people so they feel welcome, so they feel like they're part of the community. And so they put roots and feet on the floor. We haven't had that many little kids who live in our neighborhood, but we have 2 little boys right now. We had a little girl. Her name was Evie, and she lived right across the alley from me. And when I got my last dog, who's now 9, she would come over and she'd help me train my dog. And she was better than I was at training the dog. And so I'd have to tell her, stop at the alley and look both ways because people come flying through the alley, you know. And so her parents were looking for a place to go in Florida. And I told them to go to Siesta Key. And they liked it so much they moved there. And I was so mad at myself for having a good place to go. And then we didn't have any little kids who lived in the neighborhood, and now we have a Max who's 8, and he lives across the alley, and I call him Mrs. Pritzel's house. But he's redheaded and he's adorable, and they add to the neighborhood. These little children add to the neighborhood. They make it intergenerational, and so it's lovely. And now we have another little boy who lives next door to him, I think he's 4, and his name's Milo. And I just think it's really important, if we want to keep the neighborhood as a neighborhood, you have to have people who understand the history of the neighborhood and the importance of the community of the neighborhood. And I've never felt that anywhere I've lived other than here in Bayview.
I can say the same thing. I'm not from here.
Uh-huh. How long have you lived here?
A year, a little over a year.
Oh, and you feel
But
that in a
we
year.
knew that when we were looking for a place, we we had work and a school opportunity, and we kind of wanted to be back in Wisconsin after living in different places. And literally on our way out of town looking for places, the last place we stopped was here in Bayview. It was like the last place available. And by the time we were out of town, we'd already written a check and signed the lease. And like, that's where we're going. That's where we want to be.
Cool.
So, you know, when we get ready to buy, or hopefully we actually just sold a house in Iowa where we moved from, we want to stay here, you know. And we have children, and that's one of the things, is that it does seem like a very children-friendly neighborhood because it is so walkable, and you know what I mean. There's all these advantages. Their school is, you know, a really great one, with a good reputation. You know, for as bad as Milwaukee Public School kind of gets, you know.
They had a bad rap. My sister taught for MPS for 41 years, and the teachers work really hard. Here, yes. You mentioned something I was going to tell you another story about. I forgot. Can't. Keep talking.
Yeah. Well, that's just, I guess the point being is that this does, even just the short time we've been here, it does feel like home. Like for the first time of all the places that we've lived as a family, you know, with myself and my wife and our children. And I can't imagine going, even the place where I grew up most of my life, that's not a place I would ever want to live. And it's not a place where it was ever like that, where people did have that kind of sense of community. And because, I mean, we feel like, even though we get what you're saying, you know, that there is these kind of connections, people are friendly and generally, you know, sort of interested in what people are doing, and it doesn't, this feels like something permanent, you know, more than anywhere else we've lived, so.
A lot of my friends are talking about selling their homes and moving to condos and this and that, and I said they're taking me out feet first. So, I was going to tell you something else. I can't remember. Oh, well. Say that.
That's all right. Well, I guess, Kathy, do you have anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Yeah, I don't.
Good to hear these things. Do, as you get them lined up, get some pictures.
I've been working on my article on my history of my home for 3 or 4 years. It's just like, golly.
What sort of article? Like a feature?
I was just going to try and write something for the historian, for the Bayview Historical Society, you know, and one of my girlfriends from high school wrote an article, and I went, oh, I know her. We went to grade school and high school together, and she wrote an article, and so I thought I could do that, and I got interested in the house history, so I started looking at it and figuring out what was what and stuff. So, but I get going at it in the winter, and then I get tired of it, and I don't, and I got way late by all of a sudden finding out about my grandparents and my on both sides, and oh my God, so it's just you can get weighed down. As I look around all the archives you have here that you're cataloging, it's like, oh my gosh. So. You know, lots to do. It's overwhelming, but it's only just a fraction, really, of what's potentially out there, you know. It's just kind of crazy that kind of contradiction. Oh, I don't know. Let's see. Who was Corn's first name? The Bayview historian.
You can't remember.
Well,
Is it Jerome?
I don't know. That doesn't sound right. Okay.
Kern is a singer, I think. Never mind.
I shouldn't tell you about Colonel Corn?
No, that's fine. Tell us about Colonel Corn.
I don't know if I should. I'm going to, because who cares? My parents lived across the street from my sister's godparents, and they were friends with Mr. Corn, Bernard Corn, who was the principal of Bayview High School, and all my kids' friends in high school were terrorized of this principal. As you're supposed to be when you're that age, I guess, in that era. And I only knew of him as they called him Colonel. And I finally one day I asked my dad, why did they call, what service was Colonel Corn in? He said, Betsy, Colonel is for Kernal. And he wasn't on the service. And he used to be quite a wild partier. And my parents would come home and talk about the parties they had on New Year's Eve, either at their house or at Corn's house. And it was like, wow. And they tell me, you can't tell any of your friends because that'll ruin the mystique of them being afraid of him. So I was like, my friends will talk about him now, and I'll go, he wasn't what you guys thought, you know. So it was wild.
I have never run into anybody who went to Bayview while he was principal who
was not terrorized.
had any regard for him at all. They just didn't.
Well, they're scared to death of him, and then he wrote his histories of Bayview and everything, and his books and all that jazz. So, yes, I have my own collection of Bayview history books. So,
Yeah.
well, I hope I was able to be helpful. I don't know, I
Yes,
get on
absolutely.
tangents.
Very wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You have a lot of. I was listening to the man who was here before me who had pictures and stuff. I don't have any of those things. If I brought some, would you want pictures of the house or of the family or?
Mhm.
All
Yes.
those, yeah.
The family, the house, you as a kid,
Oh God.
school stuff, anything that, that you think you have good pictures of. And what we'll do is we'll scan them in and then you take the pictures back
Okay.
home. And a picture of you
Oh yeah.
as a person,
As a human being.
as you look now, because we just want to put the pictures with the stories.
With the story, I hear you. Okay. I just had the gal who was my friend who had the skunk. I just had breakfast with her this past week. So anyway, you keep your friendships from here too. That's really important, I think. I don't know. So, well, thank you
All right, thank you. Yeah.
for letting me
that's great.
tell my story. Nice
Absolutely.
to
Nice
meet
to
you,
meet
Brad.
you. Yeah, thanks.
Wow, I'm really happy that you're here and you like living here and you
That's
have
great.
to stay here. And oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.